All right, everyone, get ready for a deep dive that's going to take us to a really fascinating place. We're talking about Banias today. And this place, let me tell you, it's got layers upon layers of history, like religious significance, all packed into one spot. We've got all sorts of sources for this one, expert tour guide commentary. We've got like historical site descriptions and even a heartwarming personal anecdote. So get ready to journey through time with us. We're going to be exploring everything from pagan rituals to these epic battles. We'll even touch on how architecture could be used to like make these bold theological statements. And who knows, maybe, just maybe, we'll even learn a thing or two about olive wood along the way.
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one. One thing that I kept noticing as I was going through the sources is how Banias is right at this point where three major rivers, the Dan, the Hatzbani, and the Banias itself, all come together to form like the headwaters of the Jordan River.
And it's not just a geographical marvel, right? I mean, think about it. This merging of waters, it's like it takes on this deep, almost spiritual importance across different religions.
Oh, absolutely.
Jewish tradition, for example, talks about a secret underground tunnel at Banias, the one that Moses supposedly begged God to let him use to enter the Promised Land. Remember, we were just talking about Mount Nebo yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
It ties in beautifully with that story.
Totally. So Banias is like this literal crossroads of faith almost. Because the tour guide mentions something called theological architecture at Banias. Apparently, there's an actual pagan altar built right into the wall of a church.
Oh, yeah, it's fascinating. It wasn't just stuck in there randomly, though. It was placed sideways on purpose, like as a symbol, rejecting paganism.
Oh.
And this was during a time of huge religious and political upheaval. You had the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, these two powerful dynasties, constantly battling it out for control of the region. As a matter of fact, the Battle of Panas, which basically cemented Seleucid rule, that happened right there at Banias in 200 BCE. You might remember the Seleucids from the Hanukkah story.
Yeah.
They're the ones behind the persecution that sparked that whole event.
So wait a minute. We're talking about like ancient Greeks battling it out right where the super important religious site stands today.
Pretty much, yeah.
That's wild. But okay, speaking of the ancient world, the pagan history of Banias, that's a whole other layer of mystery. The sources mention this worship of Pan, the god of nature, those liminal spaces, the wild side of things.
Yeah, Pan, and the fact that Banias is located right at the foot of Mount Hermon, that really embodies Pan's nature, He's this god of the betwixt, between heaven and earth, the untamed wilderness and civilization.
Right.
And, fun fact, the word paddock, that comes directly from his name. Makes you think twice about those moments of sheer terror, huh?
It definitely makes those panic attacks feel a bit more, well, mythical.
Right.
But Banias' story, it doesn't end there, right? It becomes Caesarea Philippi during the Roman period.
Right.
And this is where things get really interesting from a Christian perspective. Matthew 16, it describes Jesus asking his disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" And this happens right here at Banias.
It's powerful, right? Peter's declaration that Jesus is the Messiah, I mean, it takes on this whole new meaning when you consider the location. Banias, this place where waters converge and the mountain rises up, it almost becomes this powerful symbol, like heaven and earth coming together.
Oh, I see.
Right.
Like the setting itself is speaking to the importance of that moment. And get this, the seating area, right at the site, it's actually shaped like a keyhole.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's like a visual echo of Peter receiving the keys to the kingdom of heaven.
That's amazing.
You have to admire that level of symbolic detail. But the architectural transformations at Banias, they don't stop there. We have a pagan temple, possibly dedicated to Augustus, that gets this serious makeover during the time of Agrippa, Herod's son.
Yeah, Agrippa, even though he was Jewish himself, he was a close friend of the Romans, and, he wanted to make a good impression. So he goes and transforms this temple into this luxurious floating restaurant.
Wait, a floating restaurant?
Well, you believe it.
That's thinking outside the box, or maybe I should say inside the cave.
Right.
That's incredible. But, Banias, it's not all grand structures and powerful rulers. It's also about the people, right? The people who live and work there. And this brings me to that personal anecdote I mentioned earlier. It involves a wood chopper in Bucha, which is a Druze village. This man, he refused payment for much-needed olive wood.
Oh, wow.
It was a level of generosity that really, I don't know, it stuck with me.
It's a powerful reminder of that human element, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
The Druze community, they have a rich history. They're known for their resilience, especially considering that they often sought refuge in these mountainous regions for safety and faced a lot of discrimination. And their sustainable forestry practices, really impressive. After 1967, things got pretty complicated for them with Israel. They were offered citizenship, but many initially declined, fearing what might happen if the Golan Heights were ever returned to Syria.
Right.
But the Syrian civil war, that kind of changed everything.
Yeah.
Now, more and more Druze are embracing Israeli citizenship and the opportunities that come with it, especially in the tourism sector.
So from these acts of kindness to the complexities of geopolitics, it seems like Banias holds a bit of it all. And speaking of geopolitics, we had to talk about the strategic importance of the Golan Heights. There's a site called Tel Fakher that was like the setting for a pivotal battle in the Six-Day War.
Yeah, the Battle of Tel Fakher, it's a story of incredible bravery against seemingly impossible odds. You had these Israeli soldiers tasked with capturing this heavily fortified Syrian position. I mean, they literally had a mountain to climb.
Yeah, literally.
Both literally and figuratively, right?
And contrary to what some people might think, the sources actually show that they didn't make a navigational error. Like, they purposely chose this head-on assault, which was super risky, to avoid getting wiped out in a more exposed position. Talk about a tough call.
It's hard to even fathom, right? The mental and emotional toll of that kind of warfare. I mean, we're talking sleep deprivation, constant life or death decisions, young soldiers carrying a weight you wouldn't wish on anyone.
No, absolutely not.
And it's remarkable that they managed to outmaneuver the superior Syrian forces, at night using these really low-tech tactics. They would flash their tank projectors for like 2 seconds to give a nearby tank a target. Risky, but it worked.
Wow, incredible.
Yeah, and then you have the story that really captures like the intensity of that battle. It's the story of Avigdor Kahalani. He was a tank commander, and he ordered one of his tanks, which had absolutely no ammunition left, to hold this strategic position. He was bluffing, of course.
Oh, wow.
But it worked. He stalled the Syrian advance and bought valuable time for his other units.
So bravery, strategy, a little bit of clever deception.
Right. The ingredients of a truly remarkable victory.
It's incredible. But the Golan Heights, it's not all about victory. It also bears witness to the tragedies of war. We have the Valley of Tears, or Imak Habacha, a site that commemorates this other fierce tank battle, this time during the 1973 Yom Kippur War.
Even the name Valley of Tears, taken from Psalm 84, it resonates so deeply with Jewish history. It evokes these feelings of exile, trauma, loss. It's a phrase that's just loaded with meaning.
The tour guide, he described this incredibly powerful image. The view from the valley, looking towards Quneitra, a city that was returned to Syria after the war, but left uninhabitable. He said it's like looking at a ghost city, just this stark reminder of war's devastating costs.
To be there, surrounded by those minefields and anti-tank ditches, and then you see that abandoned city in the distance, it would be a really heavy experience, Like, that landscape, it carries both physical and emotional scars.
It's almost as if the land itself absorbs the sorrow and the resilience of those who fought there. And speaking of resilience, I'm really curious to hear more about these volcanoes the tour guide kept mentioning. 2 lines of volcanoes in the Golan Heights is not something you hear every day.
It's not. But it all ties back to the formation of the Red Sea. You see, the same geological forces that split the Arabian Peninsula from Africa, they also created these volcanic features. And get this, they're classified as dormant, not extinct. So technically, they could erupt again.
Okay, now that's something to think about. Maybe Banias will give us a fiery surprise one day. It's amazing how this deep dive has already taken us from these ancient gods to strategic battles and now to geological wonders. What's standing out to you so far?
It really is remarkable how much ground we've already covered. We started with ancient gods, then, jumped to strategic battles, and now we're talking about volcanoes. But I think what really ties it all together is this incredible sense of place. How the natural wonders of Banias, from the springs to the caves to Mount Hermon itself, how those features have shaped not just the physical landscape, but also the spiritual and historical narratives that have kind of unfolded there over centuries.
You're so right. And it's not just the natural landscape either. It's how people have interacted with it over time. Think about that repurposed pagan altar, right? Or Agrippa's floating restaurant. It's almost like each civilization that came through Banias wanted to leave its own mark, like to reshape it in their own image almost.
I see what you mean.
Speaking of leaving a mark, I'm curious about the Crusaders. They played like a big role in this region's history, but I'm a little confused. The tour guide mentions Nimrod's castle being called the Crusader Fortress of Banias, but then he also says it wasn't built by the Crusaders at all.
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting. You see, for years, everyone just assumed that Nimrod's castle was a Crusader construction, because of its European-style design. But then during an archaeological dig, they found all these Arabic inscriptions and imagery linked to the Mamluk Sultan, Baybars.
So wait, not Crusader at all?
Nope. It was built by the Mamluks to actually defend against the Crusaders. Ironic, isn't it?
Yeah.
The Mamluks, they were these brilliant military strategists. They borrowed architectural styles from their enemies, the Crusaders, which is why, everyone got it wrong for so long.
Wow, what a twist. And this Baybar's character, he sounds like a pretty major player in the region's history.
Oh, he was. Baybars was instrumental in the Mamluk rise to power. He even overthrew the previous Mamluk ruler. I mean, that's how turbulent things were back then. But he wasn't just, a military leader. He was a builder. He expanded and fortified Nimrod's castle, turning it into this, impenetrable stronghold overlooking a crucial route to Damascus.
So he understood just how strategic Banias and the Golan Heights really were.
Oh, yeah.
It makes sense given all the battles that took place there later on. The tour guide even mentioned that on a clear day, you can see the Damascus airport from Mount Hermon.
Really?
It really puts things in perspective, geographically speaking.
Yeah, it does.
But, okay, how did Nimrod's castle get its name if it wasn't actually built by Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord from the Bible?
Well, that's where local folklore comes in. You see, in Arab tradition, Nimrod is also associated with power and hunting. There's a story that says he built the castle and ruled from its highest tower. But Allah, seeing Nimrod's pride, decided to teach him a lesson. He sent a mosquito to plague him. And Nimrod, driven mad by this insect, ended up taking his own sword and, well, decapitating himself. His head, according to the story, rolled down into the Hula Valley, which explains why the area is so mosquito-infested.
Yikes, that's a pretty dark origin story.
Right.
But it just goes to show how these ancient sites become canvases for different cultures to project their own stories and beliefs onto.
Exactly. History is never just a straightforward account. It's a tapestry woven from, different perspectives with myth and legend mixed in.
Speaking of myth and legend, let's go back to the pagan side of Banias for a minute. The tour guide mentioned some, shall we say, intense rituals associated with the worship of Pan. Anything you can tell us about those?
Let's just say that Pan, being the god of nature and, well, those wild, untamed impulses, was associated with some, let's just say, pretty ecstatic rites. And, well, I'll leave it to your imagination.
Okay, haha, I think we get the picture.
Mm-hmm.
But it is fascinating how Banias went from, this place of, pagan worship to a really significant Christian pilgrimage site. The tour guide talked about Caesarea Philippi, where Peter declares Jesus as the Messiah, a really key moment in Christian tradition.
It's pivotal, and the setting, it adds so much to the significance. Banias, with the rivers merging and the mountain, towering above, it almost points to this idea, of where the divine meets the earthly, which really aligns perfectly with what's happening in the story.
And then you have that keyhole-shaped seating area. It's almost like a visual cue to reinforce that idea of Peter, receiving the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whoever designed that space was really thinking symbolically.
Right. They were. Those architectural details, whether intentional or not, they speak volumes about the beliefs and values of the people who created them. They, offer us this little glimpse into the minds of those who are trying to shape these sacred spaces.
It's amazing how, all these seemingly unrelated threads, from pagan rituals to biblical stories to military history, even to that woodchopper's generosity, how they all come together in this one place.
It's the beauty of a deep dive, isn't it? We uncover these hidden connections, these unexpected intersections that help us, understand the world and its complexities a little bit better.
Oh, I agree. Before we move on, we do need to talk about the Valley of Tears, a place that, seems to hold a lot of emotional weight.
The name itself, Emek Habacha, it carries centuries of Jewish history and collective memory. It evokes those feelings of exile, loss, displacement. It's a phrase it's really loaded with meaning.
Yeah. The tour guide described this incredibly powerful image, the view from the valley towards Quentra, a city that was, returned to Syria after the Yom Kippur War, but left uninhabitable. He said it's like looking at a ghost city, just this stark reminder of war's devastating costs.
To stand there, surrounded by minefields, anti-tank ditches, and then you see that abandoned city, it would be heavy. It would be a very heavy experience. That landscape, it carries both physical and emotional scars.
The tour guide also mentioned that this was the site of the largest tank battle in the north during the 1973 war. He talked about the incredible odds the Israeli soldiers faced, like the relentless Syrian advance and these often ingenious tactics they used to just hold their ground.
And who could forget Avigdor Kahalani, right? The tank commander who ordered one of his tanks, which was completely out of ammunition.
Wait, what? A tank with no ammo?
Yeah.
How could that possibly work?
Now, it was a bluff, a brilliant and incredibly risky bluff. He knew the Syrians were listening in on Israeli radio communications, so by broadcasting orders to this, armed tank, he created this illusion of a stronger defense. And it gave his other units time to, regroup and rearm.
Wow, talk about thinking on your feet. That kind of strategic thinking under that kind of pressure, that's incredible.
It is. It really shows Kahalani's courage, his tactical genius, and his deep understanding of how to, use psychology in warfare.
It's inspiring, but also heartbreaking to hear about the sacrifices made by these young soldiers. The tour guide, he really emphasized the psychological toll of this type of combat, the lack of sleep, the constant life or death decisions, the exhaustion of fighting, this seemingly endless enemy.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine the pressure, the responsibility they carried. The Valley of Tears, it's more than just a location. It's like a testament to human resilience in the face of unimaginable suffering. You can practically, feel the weight of history there.
I agree. The tour guide, he drew this parallel between the Golani soldiers who fought in the Yom Kippur War and those from, earlier generations. Specifically, the influx of Mizrahi Jews from Arab countries in the 1950s and 60s. Do you see a connection there?
Definitely. There's this shared narrative of hardship and grit, of being underestimated, overlooked, yet rising to the challenge with incredible determination. It speaks to the, complex makeup of Israeli society, this blending of cultures and backgrounds that have really contributed to its identity.
He described the rigorous training these soldiers went through. Crawling through thorns for hours,
Yeah.
mastering rapid deployment techniques, constantly pushing their limits physically and mentally. It sounds absolutely grueling.
It really does. But it highlights that human element of warfare,
Mhm.
the training, the discipline, the unwavering commitment to the mission and to each other. It's not just about weapons and strategy, it's about the people.
Speaking of training, the tour guide had this interesting story about his own training as a guide. Did you know that he had to do his tourism course twice? The rules changed, so he had to take a shortened version later on to be able to guide incoming tourists.
Wow, that's dedication. And it shows how, knowledge is constantly evolving. It's so crucial to stay up to date, especially in fields like history and archaeology where new discoveries are happening all the time.
He talked about how challenging it is to keep up with all the updates, the constant reading, networking, site visits, all to make sure he's giving, his tour groups the most accurate and current information.
Yeah, it reminds us that learning is this lifelong journey. It's a continuous process of exploration and discovery, no matter what field you're in.
So before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I have a question for you. Knowing everything we've learned so far about Banias, what do you think is the most significant thread running through its history? Is it the, layering of religions, the echoes of conflict, or maybe that enduring spirit of generosity that we saw in that woodchopper in Bucha?
Oh, that's a tough one. I mean, the Nias is this incredible melting pot of history and spirituality and human experience. But I think if I had to choose, I'd say it's the interplay between nature and, human intervention. You have these incredible natural wonders, the springs, the caves, Mount Hermon, that have, inspired awe and meaning for centuries. And then you see how each civilization has tried to shape the landscape, leaving behind those fascinating layers of architectural transformation.
It's Banias is like a living palimpsest almost, a manuscript where the old writing hasn't been erased, but it's been covered over with, new text, creating this multi-dimensional story.
Exactly. And just like a palimpsest, it takes a careful eye and a willingness to really look beneath the surface to appreciate, the depth and the complexity of what's there.
It's amazing how even a global pandemic can lead to new discoveries.
Yeah.
Think about that recently unearthed church with the pagan altar built right into it. It's a good reminder that, there's always more to learn. That even well-studied sites can still surprise us.
Oh, absolutely. Speaking of surprises, you mentioned earlier that you were surprised to learn about the, two lines of volcanoes in the Golan Heights. I imagine you pictured volcanoes in a more I don't know, tropical setting.
I did, yeah. It's
Yeah.
not something you typically associate with this region.
No, it's a common misconception. But volcanoes, they form along those tectonic plate boundaries, and the Golan Heights just happens to be right on the edge of the Great Rift Valley, which stretches, all the way from Syria down to Mozambique.
The tour guide, he described it as like a slow-motion continental breakup. The same forces that created the Red Sea, they're still at work, pushing the Arabian plate away from Africa.
Mind-blowing, isn't it? These massive geological processes unfolding over millions of years, shaping the landscape we see today. And those volcanoes in the Golan Heights, they're considered dormant, not extinct. So technically, they could erupt again.
Wow, now that's a thought.
Hmm.
But I guess it does tie into this theme we've been talking about, this constant interplay between change and continuity, destruction and renewal.
Yeah, from those shifting tectonic plates to the rise and fall of empires to the, repurposing of these ancient structures, Banias, it really embodies that, dynamism of history and that enduring power of place.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? I mean, we've covered so much, from the whispers of ancient gods to the roar of tank battles, from those acts of unexpected generosity to the, enduring power of faith. And through it all, Banias has served as this incredible backdrop, a place where nature and history and human experience, they all intersect in these truly remarkable ways.
Yeah, it has. It's been fascinating to see how those different threads kind of weave together, creating this rich tapestry that spans centuries.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Banias, I want to leave you with a question to ponder. If you could stand at Banias today, knowing all that we've explored, what would resonate with you most? Would it be those echoes of ancient gods, the weight of history etched into the stones, or perhaps the, enduring spirit of humanity in both its capacity for, generosity and its, remarkable resilience?
It's a good question, one worth reflecting on, I think. Banias offers so many layers of meaning. It invites us to consider the interplay of, nature and culture and the human experience in a really profound way.
And that's what makes a deep dive like this, so rewarding. It's about connecting the dots, challenging our assumptions, and sparking that sense of curiosity that leads us to explore the world with, fresh eyes. So I encourage you to keep digging, keep questioning, and keep uncovering those hidden layers of meaning that make our world such a fascinating and ever-evolving place. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.